Well, good evening, everyone. Hello. Thank you so much for everyone joining us live here. My name is Meg Wheeler. I'm the candidate for State Senate in the Plymouth and Norfolk District, and I'm very excited to be here tonight with all of you for our virtual town hall on restoring our economy and seeking economic justice. So before we dive in, I want to make sure that you all can hear me. So if someone can drop in the comments and let me know that you can hear me, that would be greatly appreciated before I talk for an hour. So if you're watching live, I see we've got a bunch of people live. Let us know that you're here watching live, what town you're from. That would be appreciated. And then also just if someone can let me know that you can hear me, I would appreciate that. So I'm very excited tonight to be here and talk about this incredibly important topic. Certainly this was a topic that mattered a lot to me before COVID, but I think now with the COVID-19 pandemic, we're really seeing how critical the economic inequality in our state is and how important it is that we actually address this once and for all so that all Massachusetts residents have equal opportunity, livable wage, and the ability to support their families. Thanks, James. Perfect. I'm glad you all can hear me. So my first guest tonight, I'm so excited to have him on. I'm going to bring him on right away because I know everyone's excited to hear from him. Is Jordan Meehan, and he is a candidate for state rep, candidate for state rep in the 17th Suffolk district. And I really wanted to have him on because he is just an incredible activist on lots of different areas, but I think especially on economic justice. I'm going to let him give a little bit of an intro. But seriously, this is an incredible guy. If you're in the 17th Suffolk district, please check him out. And I'm just really excited that he's talking about issues that really matter right now, like housing, like economic justice, like tenants' rights, like climate change, like LGBTQ issues. This is just such an important voice in our state, and I'm glad to have him on. So, all right, Jordan, I'm going to bring you on. Hopefully I don't screw up the tech here. Let's add you. There we go.
We're in. Yes. Awesome. Thank you so much for having me and for that very flattering introduction, which I'm so happy I have live recorded and I can listen to forever.
You're welcome.
For those who don't know me, my name is Jordan Meehan. I am running for state rep out here in the 17th Suffolk district, like Meg said, which covers about half of the Allston-Brighton neighborhood of Boston. Yeah, it's like you mentioned, a very exciting race. I've been focusing so much on housing justice, economic justice, climate change. It's been a very busy 5 months, as you may have noticed yourself. But I'm so excited to just to talk to you about this tonight because there's so much that was broken before COVID-19, put tens of millions of people out of work, and there's going to be a lot of work that we're going to have to do in the State House next year going forward just to rebuild the social safety net.
No, I completely agree with that. And I'm glad to know that I'll have a partner like you in there because I think it really is important for us to bring our progressive values to the State House and really, really fight for these issues that matter so much.
It'll be extremely nerdy, and I can't wait.
Yes, 100%, 100%. All right, I'm going to kick it off with a really big question for you. What do you see as the biggest challenge or maybe the biggest priority to restore our economy, certainly in the wake of COVID-19, when you and I are in the Senate and the House? I mean, what should we be focusing on?
Yeah, there's so much. Wow. I think just focusing on how we can ensure that no one in this Commonwealth is too poor to live. We are one of the wealthiest states in the wealthiest country on the planet. And we can do much more to ensure that everyone has a living wage, that no one lives in poverty, that no one goes homeless. And I think that really starts with ensuring that we have a progressive tax system, a higher minimum wage that's indexed to inflation, and just economic laws that are in tune with the needs of working people. How nerdy do you want to get on this big kickoff question?
As a tax accountant, you said my favorite word, which is tax, not because I love them, but because I like to talk about them. Let's start by talking about the minimum wage, because this is something I think you and I are have both been vocal advocates of. Currently, the status is that the state has voted to raise the minimum wage to $15 by 2023. You've just released a very bold plan for this. I myself last week released my Fighting for the Frontline series. We kicked it off with workers, and one of the pieces in that was raising the minimum wage. Talk to me a little bit about why that's so important.
Yeah, so there's a really fun and handy tool put out by MIT, which calculates what a family of four or a family of three or a family of two whatsoever needs to actually live in Greater Boston. So that's how I came up with my economic plan, which was to raise it to higher than 15 and index it to inflation. Because if you can't, no one really can really live on even $15 an hour in Greater Boston. It's just not feasible.
No.
Um, and when you think about year over year, I think what's so important is to index it to inflation so that we adjust for the rising costs of living every year. Because year over year, if your minimum wage is staying the same, you're losing your purchasing power, and you're already not making enough to survive.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that was most striking for me as a numbers person is, and MIT does a great job of this on their website. I think we can probably drop the link to that in the comments, of breaking out what the average costs are for expenses. And I actually sat down and did the numbers, and I thought, okay, what does this look like if I make $15 an hour, which, by the way, is not even the minimum wage today. Like, I think we need to point that out. We're not there yet. And it's really striking how impossible it is for even a single person, let alone someone with children, someone with other family members to take care of, whatever it may be, to survive on that. And I think it's, and look, I'm a small business owner, so I understand the anxiety that a lot of small business owners are probably feeling right now, watching this going, I don't know if I can afford that. I get it. And I think I can't speak to Jordan's plans, but at least part of my plan for small business owners that we'll be rolling out in a few weeks will provide the resources you need to, and a plan to make sure that this is not going to take down your business. This is not going to be overly burdensome for you. So I get that pain, but I also think we need to think about the fact that our people are showing up every day and are working 40 plus hours for us, and they cannot afford to live. And that's just unacceptable. I mean, that we can't, that can't be a bargaining chip. That's just something we have to fix. So,
right. Since you mentioned bargain, I think it's a good chance just to mention the context and history of the 2018 Grand Bargain. I told you we're going to get a little bit nerdy. I'm so sorry.
No, I love it. Let's do it.
So just like for folks who don't know, in 2018, when we raised the minimum wage to 15 an hour by 2023, there was this legislative package called the Grand Bargain. And part of that bargain to raise the wage was to eliminate Sunday and holiday time and a half, which was a huge boon to about, I think, over 400,000 retail and grocery workers. So they no longer will be making time and a half on Sundays and on holidays. So that kind of negates a lot of the increases in their wage for the minimum. And I think that's just kind of indicative of how so much of the time in the House and the Senate, we end up, really bargaining against ourselves for what ends up being an okay but often mediocre compromise position.
Yeah,
and we don't have to settle for that.
No, exactly. I think that's exactly right. And I mean, look, I think you and I probably both understand the challenges of politicking and legislating, and that there do have to be compromises. But I think when we're making compromises like that and calling it a big win, then too many people are moving on and kind of checking the box and saying, okay, good, we solved that problem. And that's just not the right answer. And I think we've seen that in school funding. We've seen that in climate change. The list could go on.
Funding year over year. Wow.
Exactly. And again, this is not a knock necessarily on some of our colleagues who are in there right now, because they're doing the hard work of trying to get these things passed. But I think people like you and I who go in with fresh voices, go in with these bold ideas, a new perspective can be really helpful to the conversation. So
and a real sense of urgency.
Yes, well, absolutely. And look, if nothing else good came out of COVID-19, I think it is the fact that people now understand that urgency more than they did before. And so I obviously would never have wanted a pandemic, but I think much like we said when Donald Trump was elected, we didn't want it, but the good side of it, now we have it.
Learn from this and fix it.
And the good side of it is now it's forced us to, it's gotten people out there and motivated and talking about the issues that really matter. So, I think you're absolutely right. The urgency is there. So, okay, we actually have a question that came in. So this is a question that someone submitted to us who hopefully is here watching live. And I thought it would be the perfect question for you, because in my mind, you are the housing guy because of where you're located. I mean, housing is a big issue everywhere, let's be honest. But where you're located in particular, I think housing really is a critical issue.
Yeah,
so,
we're 85% rented over in this district, which is nuts.
Yeah, no, it's insane. So this came from someone in Duxbury, and this person said, before this crisis hit, rent and home cost ceilings in Eastern Massachusetts were already out of reach for most families and still rising. We have a solid middle-class family income, but we still struggle to even rent here, let alone buy a home. After this crisis, that dream is even further out of reach. Where do you see rent and home prices going, and what can be done to bring them down so that everyone can afford to live here?
Yeah, so in January, I released a pretty comprehensive housing plan, which I'll just drop into the comments
Please,
right now, real fast. But in terms of your immediate question, where I see rent prices going is up unless we do something significant. So my plan is about a 5-point plan. I think the immediate thing we have to do is lift the ban on rent control statewide. For folks who don't know, in 1994, rent control was banned statewide by a popular ballot measure, and it only went down by, I think, 2 percentage points. And since then, we've seen less housing construction than in the time before, and rent prices have skyrocketed. So I think first and foremost, rent control has to be back on the table. I'm in favor of statewide rent control like California and Oregon have implemented. But I think right now, first and foremost, lift the ban and let's get the conversation started. Beyond that, we have to talk about zoning reform. So right now, a lot of suburbs and towns outside of Greater Boston, their zoning codes haven't been updated in decades, and they don't really allow for the construction of multifamily homes, especially near like transit destinations, which makes no sense. So I think a big thing is going to have to be updating those zoning codes just to kind of spur more development in places beyond Greater Boston, just so we have a more equitable division of, the construction. Because as of now, anyone who lives in Greater Boston knows it's disproportionately falling on Greater Boston and Boston. It's starting this severe displacement crisis, gentrification, and just pricing people out of their longtime homes. So I think rent control and spurring more development just across the Commonwealth is key. And my plan calls for a lot more nerdy things like investing in social housing and a 10-point tenants bill of rights just to really secure tenant protections. But I don't want to take up too much of your time.
I don't know about you, but I feel like a livable wage and the ability to have affordable housing isn't all that nerdy. That seems pretty
it seems like human rights to me.
Human rights. Call me a nerd. That seems like a good thing.
But please do call me a nerd.
Yeah, right. Well, I think what's so important about this issue, and why I'm glad to have you on, is you're obviously in a much more urban area than where I am, but this is an issue that affects people across the Commonwealth. And you had even talked about folks being priced out of Boston and the Greater Boston area. But the problem is what's happening is when they're coming to the outer areas, is then those outer areas are being priced out, and it continues, right? So when we talk about transportation, we talk about job growth, we also have to think about the fact that folks cannot afford to live in these areas where jobs are being created or where there's adequate public transportation. I'm not sure we know anywhere where there's adequate public transportation now. But
new live stream on that together coming soon.
Right, we'll do a whole separate one on that. There will be wine for that one, probably. But I think that's the challenge too. Is we can't just solve it in one area. We really have to look at it as a
statewide crisis requires a statewide response.
Exactly, I love it. Okay, so we have just a few minutes left. You and I could seriously talk about like a million things. Let's. One of the things that I want to talk about before you hop off are some of the lack of protections or lack of benefits available to workers. So, and I know you and I are on the same page with this, but I'm thinking about things like fair scheduling laws. I'm thinking about the tipped wage. Talk to me a little bit about why those pieces are so important to your plan to protect workers, to seek this economic justice.
Yeah, so part of my plan is to call for just eliminating the tip minimum wage altogether and creating one fair wage. So I believe, I want to say it's 7 or so other states have just abolished the tipped minimum wage and just instituted a fair living wage for any tipped workers. Under current law right now, the tipped minimum wage is $4.95 an hour and will only raise to $6.75 by 2023. So just beyond being grossly insufficient to support a family, the tipped minimum, it really perpetuates a lot of gender-based inequity and discrimination, facilitates a lot of workplace sexual harassment and assault, and worsens poverty. So just for like numbers breakdown, over 2/3 of all tipped workers in Massachusetts are women, and 33% of those are moms.
Yeah.
So this is essentially a legislated pay inequity for a predominantly female workforce, and we have the power to do something about it. And I think that has to, really start with getting rid of the tip minimum wage, establishing one fair wage, and then raising that wage up.
I love it. I'm on
board.
board.
In terms of, I guess, scheduling laws, that's another one. So my neighborhood is heavily, it's very young. It's a lot of working class folks, a lot of tipped workers, a lot of shift workers. Back when I was like working retail and working in movie theaters years ago, unpredictable shifts were like a real nasty fact of life, including like clopening, when you have to close at night and then open the next morning with very little time to rest in between, which I think is just a gross way to treat workers, frankly.
I completely agree. And I will say, maybe this ages me, but I had to do that, but I did not know there was a term for that. So
oh, yeah.
I'm glad.
Did you ever have like on-call shifts where you had to like call in before you went in? Oh, I hated those.
Yeah, I did too. Yeah, 100%.
Never got paid for waiting around to find out either. So.
No, you don't. And it was always in anticipation of like, sometimes you wanted to work because you wanted the money, and other times you wanted to get called in because you were tired.
Just tell me if I'm working that day.
Yeah, exactly. No, I'm with you 100% there. And I think a lot of what you'll hear from me and from Jordan as well on our plans is really about giving workers stability.
Exactly.
And, so I think this is one of those areas in which we can do it. It's financial stability. It's economic stability. It's this sort of comfort of knowing that you have a good job that pays your bills and that you don't have to jump through hoops or to do that. So I think,
and if you don't know your schedule, how do you plan for childcare?
Let's talk about
part of your time. Please talk about childcare before we start yelling.
Did you do that on purpose? Because childcare is
I may have done that on purpose.
So I am very passionate about childcare. I certainly was before. I am more so now that I've spent the last 2 months in a house with a 3-year-old. I love my son dearly, but I think this situation has highlighted for so many people how critical quality, reliable, affordable childcare is. And, for anyone who's not a parent out there and maybe isn't well-versed on this issue, I'll tell you that even over the last few months, obviously we've been balancing, like, how do we work and watch our son and deal with all that? And how do you keep him up in school? But we've also been dealing with the conversations with the daycare about, well, who covers the financial burden of this situation? And the reason why there's passion on both sides is because both sides are suffering. The daycare is a small business that's suffering, and all the parents are, now left without childcare. And I think it just highlights how big of an issue this is. Massachusetts has the second highest childcare costs in the country, short of just DC. For many families in the Commonwealth, childcare runs 30, 40, 50% of our household income. And it's just completely undoable. We can't do it. And the federal government has said that childcare should not be more than 7% of your household income. So when I think about, which is right, when I think about that sort of difference, to me, I think one of my absolute top priorities when I'm in the state Senate is universal childcare. We need it for our parents. We need it for our working families. But I also think we need it for our economy, because if we enact universal childcare, the Economic Policy Institute has said that our economy will actually grow by 0.9%, which is $4 billion. And I'd like to just mention that Senator Spilka the other day said that we expect the Massachusetts revenues to drop by $4 billion in 2021 because of COVID-19. I don't think that's a coincidence. I feel like I have an idea where we can get the $4 billion. I mean, I know it's not apples to apples, but I think it just really highlights how big of an issue this is, because when parents have reliable childcare, to your point, they can take those shifts, they can show up for work. I know of a lot of parents who don't work because the cost to work is the same as the childcare cost. And that's, that just doesn't work for anyone. So it's a big issue for me. I could keep going. But I'll let you, so I know, talk to me about childcare in your area, because you obviously, I think you probably don't have quite as many parents as we do here, but obviously still a lot of families in your area. So have you seen this be an issue for folks?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially just going on right now, like you said, we're not as predominantly a family neighborhood. We still have a lot of young families in here that are struggling with childcare. A lot of immigrant families that are struggling not only with the cost of childcare, but the cost of just not being included in the recovery so far. A lot of folks here falling through the gaps. I just want to make one important plug just around our undocumented friends and neighbors who are not being really included in unemployment insurance and cash assistance.
Yep.
So every Wednesday in Alston, the Brazilian Worker Center on Harvard Ave turns into a food bank, offering groceries free of charge, first come, first serve for a few hours. And the line starts forming around noon and wraps around the block, almost till you get to the Pike. And a lot of those folks are younger people with families who are undocumented because they're not being included in unemployment, in cash assistance, or any of the social safety net that is meant to catch them when they're down. And that is a huge glaring inequity that we have to fix just going forward.
I agree. I agree. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think, again, too often these conversations about economic justice or how to improve our economy do leave out that really important group of immigrants. And immigrants are so critical to our society, to our communities. And so thank you for that. Okay, I'm getting the warning. I'm getting the music telling me get off stage.
Before we get the hook, yeah.
Before we get the hook. All right, so let's wrap it up. I want to pull this over here so that folks know where they can go. Give me 1 second, because I'm not talented enough to do two things at once. There we go.
So much more about this platform than I do. So.
All right, Jordan, first of all, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. This was a blast.
Of course. And I truly think you are a leader, and I'm very excited to see you in the State House. But why don't you take it away, wrap it up, tell folks where they can find you, how they can support you, and last words.
Yeah, absolutely. So our website is right there. It's jordan4ma.com. On Twitter, I'll put it in the chat. We are at jordan4ma. And right now we are really ramping up our phone banking, because that's all we can really do in these, stuck at home times. So we made calls to over 2,300 people in the neighborhood last month just to do check-ins, and we are ramping that up now. So for folks who want to help out, jordan4ma.com has all the information you'll need to help send another bold young progressive to the State House, because Meg's going to need some backup next year.
I will take all the help I can get. Jordan, thank you so much.
Of course, my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Have a good one.
You too.
All right, everyone. So great conversation with Jordan, right? And I'll leave that website up just for another second. I'm super excited now to move into the next portion of our virtual town hall, which is actually hearing from all of you. So we have some incredible folks in the district who have agreed to come on and ask really important questions about how to restore our economy. So I'm excited to bring them on. We're going to start with our very first person in a second here, as soon as I, again, figure out the tech here. So let me bring on Josh first. So Josh, I'm going to pull you up into the screen, and hopefully this works. All right, Josh, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Meg. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I love it. All right, hold on. I even have a little fancy thing here. Look at that. All right.
Hear that? That's me.
All right, Josh, let me hear it. What's your question?
All right, Meg. So I've spent the last 20 years or so in restaurants, and there used to be nothing better than a Saturday night behind the bar and 3 people deep and feeling the vibe of a busy restaurant. And now that kind of scares me more than anything.
Yeah.
So without adequate testing, and there's still been no real protocol, it's kind of left to restaurants of how to handle this. And we can space tables out properly. We can use more patio space, utilizing takeout and all these different things. But when restaurants finally do open, what about the staffs? That's, as a restaurant consultant manager and as a server and bartender in the past, that's my first thought of kind of how does the staff do that? How do line cooks not stand elbow to elbow? How does a server still give great hospitality and serve you your drink or food, but be 6 feet away from you? How does a bartender pour you your beer and stay any bit away from you when the bar is only 3 feet wide and maybe 6 feet deep at total? So just kind of how's this supposed to happen? How are we supposed to go back to restaurants? I can't wait to go back to a restaurant and have a good meal and have a good drink that I didn't cook. But how is that possible?
Yeah. So it's a great question. I'm going to pop the question up here so that folks at home can see it. First of all, thank you for asking the question. I think you are echoing a concern that a lot of folks have. And I think you're very right to point out that there's been a lot of talk about how to keep guests safe, but not necessarily enough talk, or frankly, enough answers about how to keep workers safe. And I think that's because it's a hard question. So I think first we need to acknowledge the fact that we should not be reopening our economy until it's safe to do so. And I know that's a scary thing for people to hear, because we just talked about all the issues with our economy, and we need businesses to get back to work. But I also think we need to be looking long-term here and thinking about the impacts of doing this too soon. So that's the first thing I want to say about that. I think it's critical that we have a comprehensive plan that addresses how to reopen businesses, especially ones like restaurants or salons, massage parlors, anything like that, where to your point, being close is a big part of the experience. These plans need to be made public, and they need to be made put out there to businesses well in advance of opening so that businesses can prepare. One of the concerns that I'm hearing from a lot of small business owners is, we keep hearing this May 18th deadline, but we're not really sure what happens on May 18th. What do we need to do to keep our workers safe? So that's the first piece of it. The second is that this plan needs to be created with all of the stakeholders at the table and part of the conversation. So Governor Baker has put together reopening the economy advisory board, which is great. I think that's a great start. The problem is the folks on this board are CEOs. They're presidents of hospitals and airlines. I don't see teachers on there, or anyone from the schools. I don't see any union representatives on there. I don't see any nurses or any actual workers from the medical facilities on there. I think there was one restaurant group represented. That doesn't feel sufficient to me when those are the people on the front lines really dealing with this. So that's the first piece, is really making sure that all of those voices have a seat at the table and a part of that discussion to make sure that this plan adequately takes care of our workers. I also think we need to recognize that it's not as simple as just reopening the businesses. So to your point, just because the businesses are reopened, I'm not sure I'm going to feel comfortable going to a bar or, sitting at a table somewhere if I'm near other people. So we also need to provide long-term support to some of these businesses so that even as they're reopening and the business isn't coming back right away, they have the funds they need to support their workers. Because one of the biggest challenges, we saw this in some of the southern states, is they reopened the economy and they reopened businesses, but workers who didn't feel comfortable going back, well, now they can't be on unemployment because their job is technically available. They're just choosing not to go. And so we need to address that issue so that workers who are not comfortable being in those situations do not have to take those kinds of risks. Lastly, I support a lot. So I wish I was in the state Senate right now, because I would very gladly vote for a lot of protections for workers right now that are needed right now for this. There is a bill right now in the state Senate for emergency sick pay, which I think is critical. I think we also need hazard pay for workers. We need to make sure that workers have adequate protective equipment. And, again, to all my small business folks, that cost and burden isn't necessarily falling on just them. So I am encouraged by some of the efforts I've seen in the state Senate so far. I would, pressure is the wrong word. I would encourage them to go further and to do more, because I think that's really important. But I think it really comes down to having a solid plan. And right now we have not seen that come out of the state. So I understand your concerns, and I feel that stress, and I'm hopeful that we'll see more, and that the state and the businesses will not be allowed to reopen until that plan is put into place. So
I agree. I think that's the hard part. There is no plan. There's no easy answer, but
no,
the answer isn't to rush back to opening.
I agree.
And then, as you and Jordan said, to leave a tipped employee, here's $5 an hour, and hope you get 18% to try to do this the right way.
Yeah,
it's a pretty scary prospect.
It is. It is. And, there's more that we can do, and more that I will do for workers when I'm in the state Senate. I rolled out this past week my Fighting for the Frontline series, and we started with workers, and there were 5 different items on there, but one of them is actually getting rid of the tipped wage. Jordan spoke about this quite a bit, but I think every single worker deserves a livable minimum wage, and it's not the $12 and change that we have right now. It's significantly more. So I'm excited to fight for those things when I'm in the state Senate, but I really appreciate your question, because I think you're getting to the heart of what a lot of folks are worried about right now.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks for your help.
Thanks. Have a good one. All right. So great question. I love that question. So, all right, we're going to bring on our next guest. So far, I haven't screwed this up yet, so I feel pretty happy. I see Joe, so I think we're ready for Joe. He's smiling. That's a good sign. All right, Joe, I'm going to bring you on. All right. Hey, Joe, how's it going?
Not bad. How's it going?
Good. What's your question?
So my question is, I just want to pull it up. I wanted to know how. Hold on. How do you plan? I just been involved in so many things today. Sorry.
I'll help you out. I'll help you out.
Yep. So how do you plan on addressing the MBTA budget shortfalls in light of the fact that there's going to be decreased ridership due to the COVID-19 crisis, in addition to the fact that they're going to have to run more and more trains to keep social distancing. So there's going to be an increased workforce and a decreased ridership, and the T is already like at the tipping point.
You mean you don't love the MBTA right now? You don't think it's...
I pay $45 a day to park so that I don't have to ride the T.
I get it. As someone who I will admit rides the boat. I get it. So it's a great question. Thank you for it. It's funny, before COVID-19, public transportation was a big thing on my list. Living in this district, a lot of us commute into the city, and we've seen too much over the last few years how broken our transportation system is. To just put this in some context, so revenue from ride fares right now is about a third of the entire MBTA budget for the year. Now, the MBTA did receive, I believe it was over $800 million from the CARES Act, which is great. That helps. That gets us somewhere. But as it stands, the MBTA will likely need to compromise on some important things next year, to your point, in order to address the budget shortfall if we don't do something. Now, one of my concerns is that one of the supposed priorities for the MBTA next year is actually hiring workers to implement all of the safety recommendations that were put out there this year. And so I'm concerned that with this budget shortfall, we're going to see important things like that cut. And given the state of our public transportation system, that does not seem like a good thing to cut at this point. So what I believe we need to do, and I realize this might sound crazy in a time when we're talking about budget shortfalls, but I believe we actually need to focus on creating a transportation system that benefits riders and workers. We are going to have decreased ridership. So let's use this time, this opportunity, to completely overhaul our transportation system. We need to put funding into it at the state level to be able to, first of all, I want to make it a green system. I think the current system we have is so incredibly outdated. It's so harmful to the environment. It breaks down all the time. It does not work. So let's address that now. Let's use this opportunity to create more jobs in those infrastructure projects, which we know we're going to need. We've talked about, the high unemployment rate. We've talked about the loss of jobs so far, and I think that's going to be huge. But across the board, I think we really need to focus on seeing this as an opportunity and the right time to truly do this overhaul. Now, this isn't going to come cheap, and I get that. And your question was, well, how do we actually address the budget? And I'm saying, let's put more money into it, which is not the usual answer. But my biggest fear, well, one of my biggest fears right now is that as our legislators are going into the 2021 budget conversations, that they're going to have knee-jerk reactions and start cutting things across the board that actually set us back in terms of the progress we need to make. And this is an area where I don't think we can afford to do that. So I actually see this as an opportunity. We are going to need to run more trains. We are going to need to hire more people to do that, or have more people work to do that. And I think this is an opportunity where we can really put some state funding towards it and actually overhaul the system. So that's what I would focus on. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about budget shortfalls later and some other questions, but I think, this is the hardest challenge that we're facing going into this year. Is we have a lot of big issues here in this state, and we need to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We need to be careful not to start cutting across the board and putting ourselves in a harder position a year or two from now, putting ourselves 10 steps backwards on these big issues. So that's where I stand on that.
All right, cool.
Awesome. Joe, thank you so much. I hope you and the family are doing well and staying safe.
Yeah, so far so good. Kind of like The Shining Part 2.
I hear it. How many kids do you have again?
Only 4 for now.
Only 4. I have the one, and I'm struggling. So
one on the way too. So
I know. I'm so impressed, Joe. You guys stay safe and stay healthy and hang in there.
Thanks. Keep up the good work.
Thanks. Have a good one.
Joe, bye.
All right. So great. Thank you so much for Joe for that. We're going to hop back in. So, and I think we're probably behind. Sam's probably yelling at me in the comments that we're behind. We're going to pop to some video questions. So we had some awesome folks in the district submit some great questions for us. So I want to bring these on and get these answered as well. So let's do that right now before we bring on our next guest.
Hi, Meg. Thank you for taking my question. I hope that you and your family are holding up well during all of the pandemic situation. Even before this started, I think it was pretty obvious to most of us that trickle-down or voodoo economics was every bit the disaster that Bush 41 predicted it would be during his primary debates with Reagan back in 1980. My question for you is, now that we've seen this, what steps do you think that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts should take to redirect its investments into our society so that we build up the foundation of our economy, which is working people? I look forward to your response. Thank you.
All right, I love that. Great question. Thank you, Craig, for that. Let me go ahead and pop that up on the screen so folks at home can see that question. There we go. Perfect. So I love this question because to me, rebuilding our economy is number one priority next year when I'm in the state Senate. One of the things we did this last week was rolled out our Fighting for the Frontline plan, which in this last week focused on workers. Every single week for the next 6 or 7 weeks, we're going to have an additional plan focusing on different groups that are hardest hit by COVID-19. So this week, talking about the Fighting for the Frontline plan for workers, and we talked about this a little bit with Jordan, but we talked about raising the minimum wage to a livable wage, indexing it for inflation. We talked about strengthening union protections, adding in fair scheduling laws, eliminating tipped wages, expanding unemployment benefits. These are all things that are critically important. But Craig asked about investment, and I think this is critically important because, and as I said this when Joe was on about transportation, I actually think that the way we get out of this is actually to invest. I don't think it's to cut down our spending and kind of hide in the bunker. So when I'm in the state Senate, I will be putting forward a green jobs plan. And look, we are potentially about to face the deepest recession in a century. Unemployment is at an all-time high. Job creation, in my opinion, is how we pull ourselves out of this. So I want to focus on green infrastructure projects, solar, transportation, restoring and protecting our open spaces. I want to focus on renewable energy projects. This will not only help us create good paying jobs with health insurance, provide skills training, but it'll also help us move forward in our fight against the climate crisis. These jobs tend to be more labor intensive. It'll really help to build up our workforce. So that's big for me. I also want to put in another plug here again for universal childcare. I think that's one of the biggest and best investments we can make coming out of this to grow our economy. So I said this before, but the cost of childcare in Massachusetts is one of the biggest expenses in working households. It's the second highest in the nation. Many parents are making the choice between working or staying at home. And if we implement universal childcare, we will grow our economy by $4.8 billion if we do that. And so that's, to me, what we need to be focusing on right now is that kind of job growth, that kind of economic growth. So that's what I would do. Craig, thank you so much for the question. It was a great one. All right, I'm going to bring on my next. We're going to do another video question, I think. We've got a couple more to go, and I think this ties in nicely.
My name is Carol. I live in Marshfield, and I'm a retired teacher. I worry a lot about the future health of our planet. As we start to reopen our economy, how can we take advantage of this unique opportunity to create a more sustainable, earth-friendly economy that works for everyone?
Oh, I love this question. Okay, let me pull this up so everyone at home can see. Carol, first of all, thank you very much for the question. I don't know if you're with us live or not, but you had asked about how, as we do this reopening of our economy, how can we actually create a more sustainable, earth-friendly economy? I touched on this a little bit. I just mentioned creating green jobs. I want to just reiterate that. For me, that's a huge piece of it. one of the best ways to stimulate our economy is to actually create jobs. It's to put investments into infrastructure. And I'd like to see those be green jobs. I think that, there's a huge opportunity right now for Massachusetts to be at the forefront of fighting this climate crisis. And I know this feels like a funny time to do that when our economy is struggling, but I truly do believe that the way out of this is through growth, is through investment, and is not through pulling back and shutting everything down. I also want to say that COVID-19 has, for better or for worse, started the conversation on how we work. I've been an online business owner for 3 years now, so I haven't commuted in 3 years, and I run my entire business online. My team is all over the country. We all work virtually. I think this pandemic has really got people asking, do we need to be in the office every day? Do we need to be commuting? These are important questions as we think about a plan to combat the climate crisis. Let's talk about transportation. This is the single biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions. Passenger vehicles nationwide are about 60% of those emissions. So think about what our Earth would be like if we weren't having the level of commuting that we're having. There was a study put out by some Goldman Sachs analysts that said that just as a result of COVID-19, they expect energy-related carbon emissions, which are about 2/3 of total carbon emissions. They expect those to fall by at least 5.4% this year, which is 5 times the number that it's fallen in previous crises. So we're seeing the impact that staying home has on our environment. And, I'm reading about more and more companies. I read recently, I think it was TripAdvisor was having this conversation about, do we need to have these big office buildings where everyone comes in every day? And I will tell you, as someone who runs an online company, the answer in many cases is no, you don't. And so I'm hopeful that this discussion that's been spurred by this pandemic will really lead us to have more green-friendly work practices as well. So Carol, great question. Thank you so much for that one. I think we've got a few more video questions, if I'm not mistaken. So I want to bring those in, and then we're going to bring in our last guest. Okay, so let me do this.
Hi there, my name is Abby and I'm from Plymouth, Massachusetts. I'm a recent college graduate, so I was wondering, what should our elected officials be doing to make sure that companies are hiring this graduating class during a time of significant budget cuts?
Oh my gosh. Okay, great question, Abby. Thank you so much for that. And congratulations, by the way, on graduating. I know that this is not necessarily the environment in which you wanted to graduate, and I'm sure it's been challenging and frustrating as you're missing graduation and all of the fun things that come this time of year. But I really appreciate the question. Let me pop it up so that folks at home can see it. So, first of all, let's talk about where we're at. So one of the many frustrating pieces about the COVID-19 pandemic is that students and grads were actually left behind as a part of this. So most students and graduates did not get federal stimulus checks. They didn't qualify necessarily for unemployment because they didn't make enough on their, in their campus jobs. So I've talked to a lot of college graduates who really feel left behind and are struggling. And now they're facing this uncertain future in this economy. How will I get a job? Which, I remember back in 2008, I was a couple of years out of school and had a job, but my husband was kind of going through law school at that time, and that was very much that concern of what is this going to look like if you put in all of this time and energy, and then on the other side you come out of it and there are just no opportunities for you. So I completely understand the stress and anxiety that you're feeling right now, and I'm very sorry for that. Look, the job market right now feels a little scary, right? Companies are cutting summer internships. Unemployment is at an all-time high. But there are some bright sides, and I do have some solutions for you. So the bright side is a lot of companies have turned to digital internships, which I think is great. Again, this goes back to my answer to Carol's question, which is I think we're going to see the work culture and work environment shift in this pandemic, or as a result of this pandemic. I also think that we'll see this more in just entry-level positions and regular full-time jobs too. So I think companies are starting to figure out how they can get smarter about working so that they can maintain their workforce during this. But really, it comes back to we need to stimulate the economy. So I talked about my Green Jobs program. I won't go over that again, but I think that that is an incredibly important piece of this. I also think we need to increase the livable wage. We need to provide universal childcare, and we need to provide affordable health care so that folks who are working actually have the funds to go out and stimulate the economy. That's critical as well, because the more money we're putting into the economy, the more jobs we can create for graduates like you. I also would like to create incentives for businesses to hire workers, not just college graduates, but workers across the spectrum, because there is going to be this fear or this anxiety for a lot of business owners about hiring over the next 6 months, to a year and maybe beyond. And I get that. So I think if we can create incentives for them to hire, that will be very helpful. I do want to target, I want to be very, very clear. I want to target these incentives at small businesses, at women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses. I think it's very important that we make sure we're investing our dollars in the right place and not with big corporations that time and time again take bailouts, but do not serve and support the workers within those companies. So look, as we transition to a green economy and focus on innovation, there is and will continue to be a demand for smart, educated, innovative, and forward-thinking workers. And so, if I can give you any sort of hope, I would say it's that I think while this is a bumpy time, I think coming out on the other side of this, we will be stronger for it. And, folks like you will find great opportunities down the road. So thank you so much for that question, Abby. I think we've got one more video to go to. And for everyone watching live, thank you so much for being here live. I'd love to know where you're watching from. If you've got questions, throw them in the comments. We'll probably do a quick Q&A at the end if we've got time, but I do want to get to our just our final questions here. So, and then we're going to bring on our final guest. So let me pull up this last video we've got here, and then we'll move to the, we'll move to the next question.
Hey, Meg, thanks for hosting this event tonight. My question would be, should the state, in light of this COVID pandemic, consider a new model toward helping small businesses and startups offer healthcare to their employees, potentially spurring and accelerating job growth coming out of this?
Oh, so I love that question. Tom, thank you so much for that question. Let me go ahead and pull that up here. So Tom had asked, in light of COVID-19, should the state consider a new model towards helping small businesses and startups provide healthcare for their employers, or for their employees, excuse me. So I actually touched on this a bit in my Fighting for the Frontline workers plan that I released last week. But look, this crisis has shown us that access to quality healthcare should absolutely not be tied to employment. I am a huge advocate for Medicare for All, and I know that can be a scary thing for some folks. But stick with me if you're still on the fence or if you're not sure. Medicare for All will reduce healthcare costs. If you look at pretty much every study they've done on it, that's an absolute. Annual premiums in the state of Massachusetts have almost doubled in the last 10 years. So rising healthcare costs is a huge issue, and Medicare for All is the best way that I see forward to solving that issue. It also allows us to make healthcare accessible to everyone, regardless of your employment status, which is huge. And it also expands what types of things are covered under healthcare. And it actually provides you with more benefits potentially than what you have now. So it's very much a part of my plan to support workers and really all Massachusetts residents. And I think it's critical right now. But to answer your question specifically, Medicare for All actually takes the burden of providing quality, affordable healthcare off the shoulders of the small business owners and the startup founders. And look, we are a state of innovation, and I think it's critical that we continue to nurture that. One of the biggest expenses for startup companies are healthcare costs. And so if we can actually take that burden off of those companies, then I think we're going to see incredible innovation here in Massachusetts. I think we're going to continue to be at the forefront of technology, and I'm really excited for that. Medicare for All will spur job growth. So it's going to boost wages and salaries because, again, it's less expensive than what we're seeing now. And by employers not having to cover these huge healthcare costs, they'll be able to actually pay their employees more. It also supports small businesses because it eliminates these healthcare costs that are huge for them. And even though I know one of the concerns is that there will be job losses in the sort of health insurance administration side of it, I truly believe, and there many, many studies done on this, that we will actually, those losses will be completely, if not more, offset by the increase in jobs that we're seeing as a result of having Medicare for All in place. So I really think that that's the best way to accelerate job growth. I think it's the best way to accelerate innovation. And I'm just very, very proud to stand behind that. So Tom, thank you so much for the question. All right, I think if we're good, we're gonna go to our very last guest, who has been waiting so patiently for us. So hold on, I have to figure out my tech. Okay, Carrie, are you ready? You're smiling. All right, I am gonna welcome on Miss Carrie Thompson, who is a professor. If I can figure out how to pull her up there. Carrie, how's it going?
Great. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming on. So
of course.
You're our final act.
Yay.
You got to make it good.
I'm coming at it from the higher education angle tonight. I know that a lot of us are stressed about school and what's happening in the fall at all levels of schooling. But as someone who works in higher ed, as someone who's been teaching for a while now, I'm really worried about some of my friends who are adjunct professors in the state and across the country. And I actually know of a specific adjunct in our district who was recently told that there was going to be budget cuts and probably won't be able to keep her job. So I'm curious what you think we can be doing in Massachusetts for higher ed, and especially how we can protect people like our adjuncts who are oftentimes struggling anyway, but especially in our COVID-19 times. So would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I love it. It's a great question. Thank you for that. You know, look, higher education has a particular place in my heart for me because I've done a lot of it. So it's, no, but I mean, it truly has given me the experience and the skills and the perspectives that I think make me who I am today. So I love this question, and I'm so happy to wrap it up with this question because it really does matter so much to me. So one of the things that I find so incredibly appalling is how our adjuncts are treated. And I actually didn't quite realize this until I started to talk to folks and really learn about how the system worked, that adjunct professors are exploited. I mean, they do the same work as full-time professors, but they are underpaid, they lack access to benefits, and they lack job security. And, you know, we talked with Jordan a bit about how what is so important for both Jordan and I in this is ensuring that people have economic and job security. When you have that security, I think it's so much easier to, you know, to raise your families, to be healthy and happy, and to just live your life. And so, you know, look, Massachusetts is the center of higher education. We are like the mecca here, but too many of our educators are being left behind. And so my priorities in terms of supporting adjunct professors and really all of higher education, first and foremost, we need pay parity between our adjuncts and our full-time faculty. That's not even a question to me. They're doing the same work. They deserve to be paid at the same rate. I also think we need to expand eligibility in the state's pension plan so that our adjunct professors have retirement options so that they're not left behind in that. I talked quite a bit about Medicare for All a few minutes ago, so I won't go much further into it, but enacting something like Medicare for All would be huge because it allows adjuncts to have access to quality, affordable healthcare. In the interim, if that takes us a bit to do, we need to make sure that adjuncts have access to good healthcare options because that is one of the areas, one of the benefits that they're lacking on right now. I also want to make sure that we are protecting our unions and keeping them strong so that when adjuncts are at that bargaining table, when they're negotiating you know, their contracts, that they have the protections that they need and deserve to ensure that their rights are protected, that they are getting the benefits and the pay that they deserve. I want collective bargaining agreements to go straight to the legislature for approval. I do not want them to go through administrations. I think that's a huge piece of that. And lastly, I want our adjuncts to be able to claim unemployment if they are not guaranteed a job in the fall. You know, I think this COVID-19 thing has brought to the forefront for many of us the importance of unemployment benefits. And but for many people like adjunct professors, unemployment benefits are something that they've never had access to. And it, you know, and we've seen it with small business owners too, having never had access to it. And we really need to rethink that because these are folks who need this financial benefit, this financial security during these uncertain times. So that's my plan. That's how I would get us there. But I thank you so much for the question, because I think it's so incredibly important. Adjunct professors do incredible work, and they deserve to be treated right. So
thank you.
Carrie, you're awesome. Have a good night.
You too.
All right, everyone. We are about to wrap up. We've got 5 minutes left. I have some questions that folks have submitted in advance that I would love to get to since we do have the time. So I'm going to go ahead and pop these on here and try to, I don't know if I can rapid fire through them because they're really, really good, deep questions, but I want to get through them. If you are watching live, if you've got questions, drop them in the comments. I'm happy to stay on a little bit longer if folks are to get questions answered. Sam's going to tee them up for me and let me know if we've got questions. But thank you so much for everyone to sticking with us here. I know it's getting late. I know we're all probably getting kind of tired, but I think this is such an incredibly important conversation. So, okay, this first question, let me make sure I get it right here. Perfect. Yeah, this question comes from Mike in Cohasset. So Mike asks, what changes or losses in state aid should towns in the district expect for fiscal year 2021 and thereafter? Excuse me, what grants can towns apply for to replace losses in state revenues? Yeah, great question. So let's back it up 1 second. The state has come out and said that they will not reduce state aid for fiscal year 2020. So first of all, that is not touched. They have, however, said, unfortunately, that they do expect reductions, big reductions, in state aid for fiscal year 2021. Excuse me. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. And that they're thinking those reductions will probably be anywhere, like right now they're even thinking $4 to $6 billion in decreased revenue at the state level. So obviously that results in a lot of cuts. Look, I'm a member of the Cohasset Advisory Committee, so I've seen this firsthand. We're going through the budget season right now. You know, we're seeing the cuts that we have to make in our town, cuts to our schools, cuts to our services, and we're feeling that heartache a bit. So I understand firsthand how this is going to affect our local cities and towns. As the legislature is crafting their fiscal 2021 budget, and I've said this before, I caution them not to have a knee-jerk reaction. My concern is that they will cut funding for critical local programs such as education. You know, we saw the $1.5 billion Student Opportunity Act get passed this last year. There are already people talking about potentially cutting that. I think this is a time where instead of having this knee-jerk reaction and shutting it all down, we need to be thinking about where we can innovate and where we can be more efficient and have financial savings. Healthcare, transportation, childcare. Where can we take steps to actually grow our economy instead of take these drastic measures and shut it down? Now, I want to be clear. We're still going to see budget cuts. We know that, especially in this transition time, as a lot of these things I've talked about are getting ramped up. But I want to make sure that as we're talking about this 2021 budget and beyond, that we're really thinking into the future and we're not putting ourselves in a position where we're in more trouble down the road because we made these temporary, short-term, drastic cuts. I also think we need to look to federal aid. So in 2008, Massachusetts, like many states, received aid from the federal government in the wake of that recession. It is important for us, it's critical for us to work with our senators and representatives to ensure that Massachusetts is not left behind. You know, we're seeing a lot of politics going on at the federal level. We're seeing states like New York and California and Massachusetts, more liberal states, if you will, not get the funding they need while money is going to other states. I think it's so important that we make sure we are calling our elected officials, that we are putting pressure on the folks in the federal government to get us that money. And I'll put a plug in this. It's important that we vote in November to make sure we have the right people in there to fight for this money because we do need it. So Mike, thank you so much. It's a great question. I really appreciate it. And I hope you are staying safe and healthy. All right, I'm going to bring on our next question here. This is Laura from Weymouth. So Laura says, I'm worried that in the rush to undo mitigation measures, we will leave high-risk COVID-19 and vulnerable populations behind. This would be people who are more likely to get seriously ill either due to health status or due to systemic inequalities. What would you do? What can our state do to include planning to protect these people as we plan to reopen our state? Yeah, I think this is a great question, Laura, and I really appreciate you asking this because, right now we're in the thick of it, and we're talking a lot about, folks who are at high risk and concerns over our extremely vulnerable populations. But I think we've seen this all too often as life kind of gets back to normal and things kind of quiet down, these conversations tend to die down too. And I want to make sure that doesn't happen. So I said this before, but the first thing is it's critical that we have a comprehensive, well thought out plan to reopen this economy, and that we have all of the necessary stakeholders at the table, part of that conversation. That absolutely includes someone or some people from populations that are high risk, from vulnerable populations. Right now, Governor Baker has put out an advisory board to reopen our economy, but it's made up of CEOs and presidents of hospitals. And it does not include the folks that we truly need to speak for the people on that committee. And so they and we do not have a voice right now in that fight. So I would encourage everyone now to call Governor Baker to demand that he add folks to that board that will truly speak for our high risk and vulnerable populations, that will speak for other groups that are not represented, like our unions, like our nurses, like our teachers, like our hourly workers, like our parents, and make sure that whatever plan comes out of that is a plan that works for everyone. So Laura, thank you so much for that question. All right, just a couple more here. This question comes from Adair in Boston. So Adair says, how can small businesses recover after COVID-19? So, look, we've talked about a lot of things tonight that I think could answer this question, but I'll add a couple. I think the first is actually adapting to the new environment. So as a business owner myself, I know that in any time of challenge, any time of crisis, the best thing that I can do is adapt. And so I think, for businesses that are able to pivot to serve the needs of their communities, those are the ones that I think will truly find their way through this. For example, there is a printer here in town, Goodwin Graphics, who has transitioned to providing masks and selling masks for folks. So I think it's kind of having that ingenuity and looking at what are the needs of your community right now, that I think will help businesses stay afloat both now, but also as we go to fully reopen our economy. I also think it's important that you be vocal and that you reach out to your legislators to encourage them to fight for financial support for small business owners. Share your stories with them, have them hear what you're going through. I talk to a lot of elected officials, and the thing I hear time and time again is that oftentimes they're not truly aware of the full details of an issue until they hear the personal stories from the folks that it's affecting. So, if you've never called your elected official before, now is a great time to do it. But lastly, I want to highlight the fact that the federal money, that part of the CARES Act, the majority of it did not go to small businesses. And that's a huge problem. And this is happening too often in our country, where big companies are becoming the beneficiaries of our tax dollars. And that's unacceptable. This is why it's critical that we have small business owners in the state Senate, in the state House, at the federal level. It is critical to have people who understand the needs of small business owners, who are small business owners themselves, and who can truly not just speak to what small business owners go through, but fight for the needs of small business owners. So it's a great question. Thank you so much. And I hope you are staying safe and healthy. All right, we've got our last question here, where I know we're a few minutes over. I'm going to take this, and then maybe I'll take a couple of questions from the comments, and then we'll wrap it up. I hope everybody's doing well, staying with me. All right, this question is from Horace. So Horace in Hingham. Massachusetts requires everyone to wear face masks, but low-income people cannot afford to buy them online. Why doesn't government supply face masks for low-income folks? I think this is a great question. And look, masks are one of the ways that we can prevent COVID-19 from further spreading. It's one of the ways that we can protect our communities when we do reopen our economy. But as you've pointed out, they're not accessible to all Massachusetts residents. And, look, I strongly support and encourage the state to immediately provide funding for masks to low-income residents, to workers on the front line. I think that the state should actually partner with local businesses. Goodwin Graphics is one I just mentioned a little bit ago that's pivoted their printing company to make masks. I know a lot of companies out there have done that. I think states should partner with companies like that to ensure that they have the masks available for folks who need them, that cost is not an issue for those people, and that we can make sure that every single person who needs a mask, and pretty much that's everyone right now, has a mask. So it's a great question. Thank you for that. All right, I think we've got a couple of questions in the comments. I've got one from Kim here. So Kim, I'm going to bring this on. Bear with me one second. All right, so this is Kim in Marshfield. Hi, wondering how long can the state continue unemployment at the current rate? Will the state be able to maintain until we have gotten on the other side of COVID-19? Kim, it's a great, ooh, I've been talking too long. Hold on. It's a great question. And I actually want to check on that for you to give you an exact date, because I don't know that specifically. I will say that we've been on a lot of calls with folks from the state and paying attention to a lot of the state communications. And in this budget process, they've been talking a lot about cash flow and what they have. So I know that the state has said that they are in a position to continue to pay all of their obligations through June, through June of this year, June 30th, that includes unemployment. But I don't know if we have an update on that. So I want to get back to you on that. But I think you were highlighting a really big concern that a lot of folks have. Unemployment is at an all-time high. I think we've surpassed 1 million folks in Massachusetts who are now on unemployment. And there isn't necessarily an end in sight. Josh and I talked about the fact that even if businesses reopen, a lot of workers may not feel comfortable going back and working in those businesses, and may still need to be on unemployment. So it's a great question. It's something we absolutely need to be thinking about. And I'm hopeful, and I will be vocally speaking out about this, that as our current elected officials are working on that 2021 budget, they're ensuring that there are enough funds in the unemployment account to make sure that we can pay out those benefits. I will say, to sort of make one point, a portion of the unemployment that's being paid out right now is coming from the federal government. So that additional $600 per week, that is part of the CARES Act from the federal government. But absolutely, the state is, this is a concern for the state, and it's something we need to stay aware of. Okay, I think I got through all the questions, but oh, you know what? I have one more. Hold on. Sorry, one more. Let me see if I can find this. Here we go. Pull my, we're going to pull that one off. And Sam, let me know if there are any more, if I've missed any, because we've got so many comments tonight. You all have been so incredibly amazing. If anyone has comments you want me to answer before I hop off, drop them in the comments now, because I want to make sure I'm not missing any. Oh, here we go. Okay, perfect. So Tora asks, when the economy does get better, what advice would you have about starting new businesses or stores? Look, I think that oftentimes in, when the economy is down, I think a lot of people kind of hunker down and think that this is not the time to start a new business. But let me be very clear. As a business owner, I 100% believe that this is, maybe not today, but in the near future, the right time to start a new business if you can. In order to move our economy forward, in order to do a lot of the things I talked about tonight, we need innovation. We need job creation. We need job growth and economic growth in our state. And so I think it's critically important that we continue to support small businesses and innovation. And one of the ways in doing that is actually providing incentives, whether it's through tax credits, through grants, through other programs, to encourage and support folks who want to start their own businesses. So I'm a big fan of people starting their own businesses, because not only am I a small business owner, but my clients, the people I work with and serve and support, are all newer small business owners. And I love seeing that energy and that excitement at what they're able to create and what the impact they're going to have. And so for me, this is just an incredibly important issue, and I really appreciate the question. So thank you for that. Okay, Sam, if you can let me know in the chat if we are good to go, or if I've missed any questions, that would be great, because I think I got through all of them, which is crazy because we're not that far over time. So I'm kind of impressed, but let me know if there's anything else. looking through really quickly. But thank you for everyone who joined tonight. This is such an important conversation, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come into your home and have it with you tonight. We will be doing many more of these, so if you have any questions at all, you can actually send me a question. I respond to every question by going to megwheeler.com/questions. And I'm just always happy to hear from folks, because it is, like I said, it's so important to me to hear what's on your mind, to hear what you want us to be talking about at the state level, and frankly, to know how I can better support you. All right, I'm going to wrap it up there. For everyone here tonight, if you would like to learn more about my campaign, you can do that by going to megwheeler.com. For those of you who are ready and excited about everything I've talked about tonight, and who are on board and wanting to support us, if you head to megwheeler.com/pledge, I would love for you to sign our pledge and show our initiatives and our campaign and our dream your support. That would be greatly appreciated. And we will be back here next week with more, more great events, more to come. But until then, I just want to say I'm so incredibly grateful for all of you. I'm grateful for this opportunity to have this very important conversation with you. And I'm really looking forward to fighting to restore our economy, to fighting for economic justice when I'm in the state Senate, and to better representing you so that all of us have the economic security, the financial security that we all need and deserve. So thanks, everyone. I hope you have a great night. Hope you're staying safe and healthy, and we'll talk